There are some ideas that are so fundamental, so big, we just never think to question where they came from. Like the belief in one single God. The story we all know is that it was this radical, brand new invention. But what if the evidence for a completely different story, a much, much older one, has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? Okay, let's get into it. So let me just ask you this. If I said, who was the first monotheist? I bet one name just immediately pops into your head, right? It's a story we think we all know. And that story, of course, goes something like this. The whole world was swimming in gods, idols everywhere. And then one man, Abraham, has this absolutely revolutionary idea. Nope, there's only one. And that idea becomes the foundation for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A clean, sharp break from a world that was supposedly polytheistic through and through. But here's the twist. What if that's not the whole picture? What if the Bible itself is hinting that the knowledge of one supreme God wasn't an invention at all, but more like a universal human heritage that had just been forgotten? Okay, this is the moment that should make you lean in a little bit. Right at the very beginning of Abraham's journey, he runs into this mysterious guy, Melchizedek. Now, he's not an Israelite. He's the king of Salem, what we now call Jerusalem, and he's a priest to El Elyon, God Most High. And the wild thing is, Abraham doesn't say, wait, who's that? No, he accepts the blessing, he gives him a tithe, he totally recognizes that they're talking about the exact same supreme being. This is all before Israel is even a nation. So who is this guy, and how did he already know? And get this, Melchizedek wasn't a one-off. It turns out the Bible is actually peppered with these unexpected believers, people who were not Israelites, but who already seemed to be in on the whole one God thing. I mean, just look at this lineup. You've got Abimelech, a Philistine king. Laban, an Aramean, who actually says, blessed be YHW. You've got Jethro, a Midianite priest, and even Balaam, a prophet from Mesopotamia. All of them, in their own words, are acknowledging the God of Israel, sometimes even using his most personal name, YHW. These aren't converts, they're outsiders who already seem to get it. So this seems to be pointing to a really crucial difference. The big debate back then wasn't really about whether a supreme God existed. Lots of people seemed to be on board with that. The real split was in how you understood all the lesser divine powers. For ancient Israel, any so-called lesser gods were just aspects or attributes of the One. All power flows from him and goes back to him. But for many other nations, those lesser powers started being seen as totally separate beings you could worship on their own. And that, according to this theory, is where polytheism came from. Not from ignorance of the One, but from a distortion of the idea. All right, the plot thickens. We've looked at people. Now let's look at language. Specifically, the most sacred name for God. Just so we're all on the same page, the most personal and sacred name for God in the Hebrew Bible is this 4-letter name, YHW. You've probably heard it called the Tetragrammaton. It was considered so holy it was almost never said out loud. And the conventional story is that this name was revealed exclusively to Moses at the burning bush. But check this out. That secret name, or something really, really close to it, starts popping up in places you would never expect. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus mentions the Jewish God and calls him Io. We see similar forms in Aramaic and even in Canaanite names. This kind of suggests the name wasn't a total secret in the ancient world. And then there's this quote, which is, honestly, it's just mind-blowing. This comes from a pagan Greek source, the Oracle of Apollo at Claros. It's answering a question about who the supreme god is, and it says to consider Jal, that's YHW, as the head of all the gods. It even identifies him as the ultimate power working through every single season. So here you have a pagan oracle straight up naming the Hebrew God as the boss of everyone. So you might be wondering, if this knowledge was kind of floating around everywhere, how did later Jewish thinkers make sense of it all? Well, that brings us to this idea that truth wasn't exclusive, but universal. In Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, there's this really profound idea. Every foreign deity has a spark of holiness inside it. Now, this doesn't mean those gods are real, not at all. It means that the very human impulse to worship them comes from a genuine, even if it's misguided, recognition of something divine. It's like seeing the one God, but through a shattered, distorted lens. And that idea gets even bigger. There's this ancient teaching that says God has 70 names, and those 70 names correspond to the 70 nations of the world that are listed in Genesis. The thinking here is just beautiful. Every nation, in its own language, in its own way, was calling out to the exact same universal God, They were just using a different name. Israel's job then was to announce that all these different names ultimately point back to the one. This even helps clear up something that trips a lot of people up. Why is the main Hebrew word for God, Elohim, a plural word? Critics love to say, see, proof they used to believe in many gods. But the ancient Jewish sages had a totally different take. They taught that the plural form isn't about counting gods, it's used to show that this one God contains within himself the totality of all powers, all forces, all attributes in the entire universe. It's a plural of majesty, of ultimate greatness. So, where does all this lead? We've got evidence from inside the Bible, from linguistics, from later theology, and it's all pointing in the same direction. And that direction leads to a conclusion that, well, it pretty much flips our whole understanding of religious history completely upside down. The standard theory we're all taught is that religion evolved. Humanity started with simple nature worship, then moved up to a messy pantheon of gods, and then, only very late in the game, a few cultures finally graduated to monotheism. But based on everything we've just seen, what if we have that timeline completely backwards? This is a radical alternative. It argues that what we see on the right, the complex polytheism of the ancient world, wasn't the starting point. It was the end of a long process. A process of degradation. In the middle, where an original, simple, intuitive belief in a single creator, over on the left, got fractured and broken down over time. In this view, humanity didn't slowly climb up to monotheism, it fell away from it. And the crucial point here is that this first belief wasn't some complicated philosophy. The argument is that for early humans, a simple, unified idea, one cause for everything, is actually way more likely than a complex system of dozens of gods with intricate backstories. It was a gut feeling, a spontaneous intuition, which is just another way of saying what religion calls revelation. And this just reframes everything. If this theory holds, then Abraham wasn't an inventor, he was a restorer. The unique role of Judaism wasn't to create some brand new idea out of thin air, but to rescue, to purify, and to preserve the oldest, most basic truth of humanity, a truth that had been buried and almost forgotten. So, we'll leave you with this. If the belief in one God isn't the exclusive property of one people or one tradition, but is instead a shared primordial memory for the entire human family, what does that change? It might suggest that underneath all our divisions, all our different names and rituals, there's a common thread that connects every single one of us going right back to the very beginning. And that is definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us.